Alrighty. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining the EPA Pesticide Enforcement session this morning. Before we get into some quick introductions, if you can, please write your name and your tribe or whoever organization you're working for in the chat box, and just so we can keep a tally of who's all attended this session. But before we get started, I think we should do some brief introductions, so I'll go first. My name is Peter Earley. I'm an EPA project officer in the pesticide office in EPA Region 9. Helene, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Helene Ambrosino. I work at EPA headquarters in the Office of Enforcement and Compliance Assurance's Office of Compliance.
And I'm Julie Jordan. I work in the front office of Region 9's Enforcement and Compliance Assurance Division.
Hi, I'm Buda. I'm a special agent with EPA CID in the San Diego office.
And my name is Benjamin Carr. I'm the Assistant Special Agent in charge in EPA Region 9 Criminal Investigation Division.
All righty. Thank you, everyone, for the introductions. So the format of this session, I will start off with a brief introduction, going over a presentation on cannabis, kind of a refresher for those who attended this session a few years ago, but I did provide this presentation on the differences between marijuana and hemp. So we'll start off with that, and then we'll go into a broader discussion on enforcement-related topics if either of you have questions. So if you guys have questions, please feel free to post them in the comments, and we'll try to answer them as quickly as we possibly can. So let's go ahead and get started. So just to make sure, can everyone see the screen pretty well? If you can see it, just press yes or type yes. Okay, perfect. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So cannabis and pesticides. Just a quick review of the 2018 Farm Bill. This was the bill that changed certain federal authorities relating to the production and marketing of hemp. This bill is preserved under the FDA's authority to regulate products containing cannabis or cannabis-derived compounds under FD&C Act and Section 351 of the Public Health Service Act. If you have any questions related to the Farm Bill, please feel free to post them in the chat. This essentially legalized hemp, but with certain restrictions. First being that hemp cannot contain more than 0.03% of THC per Section 10113 of the Farm Bill. There will be no significant shared state-federal regulatory power over hemp cultivation and production. And the law outlines actions that are considered violations of federal hemp law, including activities such as cultivating without a license or producing cannabis with more than 0.03% THC. So those were some of the outlines and restrictions in the Farm Bill regarding hemp legalization. So that kind of brings us to the question, what is really the difference between marijuana and hemp? Hemp is defined as cannabis that contains 0.03% or less THC. While the legal definition described above is not legitimized in the Agricultural Act of 2018, hemp has generally been used to describe a non-intoxicating cannabis that is harvested for industrial use of its derived products. Marijuana, on the other hand, contains more than 0.3% THC and can induce psychotropic or euphoric effects on the user. And marijuana is commonly used medically and recreationally legally in some states where it's legalized. So this chart right here shows some of the many uses of hemp for different products, and also some of the different components of hemp and for those products where it's used. So you can obviously see the roots are used for organic compounds and nutrients, remedies for arthritis and joint pain. Some of the leaves are used for other objects as well, but the stalk also has other components that can be used for, such as industrial textiles and paper. And then also the seeds can be used in some forms for body care, foods, and other industrial products, such as oil paints and varnishes and stuff of that sort. So this is an EPA-approved list for pesticides on use on hemp. So this was the list that I got from the EPA website 3 years ago when I posted this. So I'll post a new link to make sure that there's more, at least a more up-to-date list on some of the products used. And if anyone wants to see this list, please feel free to reach out to me and I'll make sure to send it to you via email or even post in the chat. But that brings me to the EPA R9 state contacts list. So anyone, any tribe or anyone that's in EPA Region 9 in California, Nevada, or Arizona, this is the contact page where you can reach out if you have any questions related to hemp or marijuana. These are the places to go to. So that brings me to an update on EPA's pesticide program activities on hemp. This presentation was given on June 11th last year. So this just outlines some of the regulatory authorities regarding hemp regulation. So in October 2019, the Farm Bill established federal regulatory oversight of the production of hemp under the USDA. USDA approves plans submitted by states and Indian tribes for the domestic production of hemp, and it also establishes a federal plan for producers. What does that mean for the FDA? So under the FDCA, the FDA provides scientific and regulatory support for research on potential therapeutic uses of cannabis. It also regulates products such as food, drugs, cosmetics that are derived from cannabis. And in certain such situations, it also enforces legal hemp laws as needed. For the EPA, under FIFRA, EPA regulates the sale, distribution, and use of all pesticides, including pesticides intended for use on hemp products, through a registration process. This establishes maximum levels of tolerance, the amount of pesticide residue allowed to remain in and on each treated food commodity in accordance with FFDCA. And currently, there are no tolerances for hemp. So with that, that brings us to the end of the presentation. I think now we can kind of transition to kind of a broader discussion or questions that any of you have regarding any of the information that I just said. But yeah, I think, Helene, would you like to provide maybe some comments or feedback?
Well, sure, Peter, and hi, everybody. Yeah, I guess I just want to have a little bit of a deeper introduction to myself and my office and what we do and how it applies to our topic for this panel. So as I mentioned, I'm with the Office of Compliance, that's within OECA, Office of Enforcement and Compliance Assurance. And applicable to our discussion today, we do a couple of things, okay? We oversee compliance monitoring activities that take place out in the regional offices. And so to that end, what does that mean? We issue some guidances that maybe some of you are familiar with, the FIFRA inspection manual, the Worker Protection Standard inspection manual. Part of my office, we credential inspectors with federal inspection credentials. And we also oversee the FIFRA State and Tribal Assistant Grant Program, where we allocate money given to us by Congress. And last year it was $24 million. And we allocate it out to the regions to conduct these types of activities, compliance monitoring activities, okay? And there's quite a few different inspection types when you're talking about FIFRA, but quite often when you're talking about cannabis, the conversation goes to what we call use inspections. A lot of folks want EPA to go to facilities that are growing this particular crop and monitor compliance with statutory and regulatory requirements, and most importantly, with pesticide labels. Labels act as the law under FIFRA. And so that's where the big questions come in. There are other inspection types that would be applicable. So for example, when Peter was describing the kind of the background and lay of the land on the crops, one thing I would add is that there are no pesticides currently registered for use on marijuana. And so one of the inspection types for which we monitor compliance under FIFRA with our civil inspectors is there's a prohibited act in FIFRA Section 12 that says any person is prohibited from using a registered pesticide inconsistent with its label. We call those use inspections. And there's a lot of stuff on labels that we're monitoring when we go and we do a use inspection. Okay. And where do we go? We, in the case of cannabis, it would probably be some sort of agricultural establishment, but really it's wherever pesticides are used, right? That's where we would go. And we would use our federal authority. It would be an inspection conducted under FIFRA, and we would use an inspector who is federally credentialed. And there lies some of the interesting challenges when it comes to cannabis, because cannabis, which includes marijuana and hemp over 3% THC, is considered a controlled substance federally under the Controlled Substances Act. So it would be an illegal crop. So it's not like potatoes, it's not like tomatoes, it's not like looking at other crops. It's very unique. It is federally illegal in those instances. Yet we have this scenario, this situation where many jurisdictions, and the numbers are growing, where those very same crops are legal. Okay, there's many states and perhaps some tribes as well that have legalized either recreationally or medicinally the use and the growing of marijuana. So you would have a grow facility that's operating legally in the state. So very reasonably, people would ask, can we, much like a facility that would grow tomatoes or soy, cotton, can we go to marijuana grow facilities and conduct compliance monitoring to see if pesticides are being used consistently or inconsistently with labels? Well, when this question was posed to my office, and that is the Office of Compliance, we expressed this position, and that is we don't support sending federal inspectors under federal authority to places where it would be reasonably expected that an illegal crop is being grown. So that would be EPA inspectors with federal credentials and conducting federal inspections. But then it would be reasonable to ask, well, what about, you probably know we administer the grant program that I mentioned, where and tribes conduct compliance monitoring activities under a cooperative agreement. There are, in fact, 19 tribal cooperative agreements to conduct FIFRA compliance monitoring activities. Well, if the jurisdiction, whether it be a tribe or a state, has its own authority, perhaps a tribal pesticide code or a state pesticide program, and its own authorities to conduct these inspections, then we would not have a position on that. But to the extent the cooperative agreement, the jurisdiction would be using federal authorities and federally credentialed tribal or state inspectors, we would say we would not want, our position would be we would not support that activity, nor would we want federal funding to be used for inspections where illegal crops would be reasonably expected. So, like I said, it's very different from other crops and other situations, but this is the position that my office, the Office of Compliance, has expressed for the last several years. And there has not been an effort yet to have the office relook at that position. But that's partially why I'm very interested to hear from my other panelists and from the folks on this breakout session today. So I'm just taking a look to see if there's any questions that have come in. And you're welcome to ask me any questions about what I've just shared with you.
Okay, I think so far I don't see any questions, but Julie, would you like to provide some more perspective from the EPA Region 9?
Sure. So I'm Julie Jordan. As I mentioned, I work in the front office of our division, but I was in the pesticides program for 13 years. I was an inspector. I still do enforcement cases under FIFRA. So this is something we have run into over the years. I just want to give a little bit of background. I'm just going to share, if I can make this work, our org charts so that you know how Region 9 is set up. So you should be seeing this slide of our overall region. So we have these different divisions. We have a water division, an air division, a legal division, Office of Regional Counsel, Superfund, ECAD, which is our enforcement division where I sit. We have Land Chemicals Redevelopment Division, which is where Peter sits. That's where the pesticide grants are managed. We have a lab and we have a mission support division. We also have sort of a new division called Tribal Intergovernmental and Policy Division, and that is where the GAP grants sit. So you may have a GAP grant or you may have an actual pesticide grant. I'm going to show you also, hopefully you're now seeing the Enforcement and Compliance Assurance Division org chart. And so the pesticides office sits in this branch called the toxics branch. So that's TSCA, which is the toxic chemicals law, and then FIFRA, the pesticides law. And we have all these other programs that sit in the enforcement realm as well. So oftentimes these illegal grows or even hemp grows have these other environmental issues. So these other offices may get involved as well. Okay, so I'm going to come back here and I'm going to stop sharing. So as Helene mentioned, there are some issues around sending our inspectors out into these situations. There are safety issues. There are toxic chemical issues. All of this is something we have to take into account. What we want you to know is if you think that there is an instance of pesticide misuse going on, whether it's illegal marijuana or whether it's hemp, whatever it is, we are here to enforce pesticide labels. That's what we do. The label is the law under FIFRA. So we do want you to contact us. If it turns out to be a situation that's unsafe for us to participate in, we will get folks like Ben and Gabby involved. We will make sure that the correct folks can help respond. So we don't want you to feel like you're on your own in that situation. So we do take enforcement based on evidence that's collected. We have a session later on today about an investigation that went on out at Navajo, where the Navajo tribe did the entire investigation, 24 inspections, and then sent us the reports, and we took action on it. So that type of thing does happen. This is a very case-by-case situation. Again, don't want to put people in harm's way. And so I think that's the main thing, that somebody will help you, but it is something we have to evaluate each time something like this comes up. So I think that is it for me. I'm going to pass along, I think, to CID now.
And just before we pass along to CID, so Nina, I see your question. We'll answer that right at the end after CID, but yeah, let's get a brief introduction from CID. So Benjamin, would you like to kick that off?
Sure. I'm actually going to ask Gabby if she could just give us a little overview here of our program and some of the current efforts that we're making right now to, go after especially illegal pesticides that are used on marijuana grows.
Thank you, Ben. So going off what Ben said, just to give everyone a background, so for anybody who doesn't know what CID's role is within EPA, we are special agents, and we have full authorized law enforcement officers. We're empowered to enforce the federal environmental laws. We're gun-carrying agents with full authority to enforce any environmental federal law throughout the U.S. EPA CID has a number of agents throughout Region 9 in various offices. Ben and I happen to be in the San Diego office, but we do have agents all throughout California, all throughout Region 9. And we prosecute and investigate the most egregious environmental crimes, including those on tribal lands. EPA investigates as far as illegal cannabis. Our main role would be to investigate the use of pesticides or the distribution of pesticides that eventually get onto a marijuana grow. We have the authority to do search warrants to enter an illegal cannabis grow. And although we do have the authority to do all of those things, our main role is to investigate the use of pesticides. We're not an agency that investigates drugs or anything like that, or illegal drug use. That would fall onto DEA or FBI. So a lot of the times our role is to assist DEA or FBI or HSI in their investigation into illegal cannabis or marijuana grows. And if they find that pesticides are being used on those sites, then we would come in and investigate the use of the pesticide, where the pesticide might have come from. And then also with Clean Water Act, that can come into play if a hazardous substance such as a pesticide has gotten into a waterway. That could be another statute that we would investigate. But EPA CID is here to help and investigate any kind of pesticide that's being used on a marijuana grow. That's our main role, is to enforce the use of pesticides. But just to note that that's not our main role is not to enforce drugs. We were there to assist other agencies in their roles of going onto a grow site and looking for illegal grows and things like that. Anything else, Ben, do you want to add as far as that? Did I cover that?
Yeah, sure. And, we're not in the realm of marijuana eradication. Our agents are not outfitted to go in and, conduct eradication activities. So as Gabby said, just reiterating it, we usually assist with other agencies on that. Also, 9 times out of 10, the pesticides that we're looking at are actually unregistered pesticides. And that, Helene, if you want to touch a little bit on that, that's a different part of law. Like, there isn't actually a label we can point to say that it's being misused. Instead, it's more the illegal sale and distribution of that unregistered pesticide. So the law actually is a little bit different and nuanced in a way that we can't just go in and say, you're using this incorrectly. It doesn't really fall under it statutorily.
Yeah, I mean, did you want me to jump in
Yes.
there? Okay.
Yeah, if you could, that would be great.
And I'm not from the Office of Pesticide Program, so I don't want to overstep, but you're absolutely right. There is no registered pesticides registered for use on these illegal crops, okay? But it's a funny thing. There are pesticides that would be acceptable to be used. So for example, we call them minimum risk. So anything that's accepted from FIFRA, exempted, excluded from FIFRA, they can use. The problem is, of course, the effectiveness. And so, yeah, there's all sorts of things being used on this crop, from registered pesticides, which would be illegal because nothing's registered for use on this crop, to unregistered things. And then you have to examine, well, are they unregistered because they're exempted or excluded? Or are they unregistered for some other reason? And what is the use? So, yeah, absolutely. There's other types of inspections that could apply. But most often when we're talking about cannabis and cannabis grow facilities, people are interested in use and whether pesticides and how are they being used.
And I could step in here also. I mean, the unregistered pesticides, it gets a little tricky with use. Because normally when we're regulating unregistered pesticides, it's the sale and distribution aspect that we take enforcement action on. But there are ways to take use cases for unregistered pesticides, but it becomes very tricky under the law because the user becomes a distributor. And since this is usually in a legal situation all the way around, you're not going to have like a licensed applicator like Terminex involved in marijuana grows. So we would have to look at that. I mean, we would want to track down where are those products coming from? Are they being illegally imported? And I know you guys have done some criminal cases for importation of unregistered pesticides. So there's a lot of moving parts here. It takes a lot to investigate these.
And Julie, that's a great segue. So we did have, moderate success working with other federal law enforcement agencies going after individual grows on public lands where they were selling and distributing illegal pesticides that were unregistered. However, the big sort of ticket items were the drug charges, the depredation of federal lands. So EPA didn't really play a huge role in making those cases actually happen. We really leaned on our federal law enforcement partners with Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, and Park Service. They really kind of had the teeth there. So Gabby and I actually have been a part of the Border Pesticide Initiative down here in San Diego to prevent these unregistered pesticides from getting into the country. So, and just so everybody knows on the line, when we say unregistered, you guys will be familiar with Mexican pesticides being used illegally on these marijuana grows throughout California, both on public and private lands, and I'm sure on the tribal lands, you've seen that happen. So really our fight has been to go after those. So Gabby, if you could just give a quick overview of what we've done to date for the Border Pesticide Initiative to really prevent these pesticides from getting into the country in the first place.
Yeah, so we've had this pesticide initiative for about 2 years now, and we have over 55 defendants currently charged for either smuggling pesticides, or they're sometimes charged with for use and distribution or conspiracy. A lot of the pesticides that we see, they're either canceled pesticides or they don't have the proper labeling. The main ones that we've seen that are being used on the cannabis grows are carbofuran, which is a canceled pesticide, methimidofos, another canceled pesticide, and then some other restricted pesticides. But I think the main thing here is, a lot of these pesticides are coming from Mexico. They're being made in Mexico without the proper labeling instructions, with it maybe not the proper testing, and they're making their way onto our lands and being used on these illegal marijuana grows. And studies have shown that these pesticides can last in the soil for years, and eventually that gets into the waterway and causes irreparable damage to our environment and wildlife. So we've done a great job kind of catching these people that are smuggling pesticides at the border. We work with CBP. CBP would initially stop somebody who has pesticides either in their car or in their possession. They seize the pesticides, and then EPA CID takes it from there as far as prosecuting them and working on trying to figure out where all these pesticides are being taken to. So that's kind of our main role, I guess, right now is trying to stop the pesticides from even entering the United States, because it is causing a lot of damage to our environment and to the wildlife and health.
And it's interesting because we talked about this a little bit earlier, how the exempted pesticides, so technically, are the ones that are being used, but they're not as effective. It seems like a lot of these illegal marijuana growers are then going to extreme measures and pulling in very toxic banned pesticides from Mexico and smuggling them into the US for use. So we've really had a huge impact. I'm actually going to put a link in the chat here to a local article that was written by or done by the news here in San Diego. And it has a nice little video attached to it that describes a little bit more in detail some of the efforts that we've made here in San Diego. It looks like there's a question from Nina in the chat. Does somebody want to address that one?
Let's go back to her original question. I'll just read it out loud. So tribes should use their tribal laws, not federal, to inspect, and not the funds under their cooperative agreement.
Yeah, I don't mind addressing that. So first, I guess I would want to point out the difference between what I was saying and what Nina is talking about is different from what Ben and Gabrielle is talking about. They, and I'm not sure if this was understood when you guys were talking, but you're part of the criminal division of EPA. You guys are special agents. You are law enforcement officers, okay? The civil inspectors I'm talking about are not. And so that's one reason for the difference. And Nina, in terms of what you're saying, and let me scroll back up to the chat. So what we're saying is we would not support, OC, Office of Compliance, would not support the use of federal money for civil inspections to be conducted under the FIFRA-STAG cooperative agreements. So there are 19 tribes with cooperative agreements. And some of those tribes have tribal pesticide programs, some do not. And in those cases, they're solely conducting inspections using federal authority, okay? But in either case, we do not support the use of our federal funding to do civil inspections where there's a reasonable expectations of an illegal crop. Does that help? So if you have tribal laws, if you have tribal funding, we would have no opinion on that, no position on that. You would be free to conduct inspections under the authorities that you have, using the funding that you have. But under our agreement, we would not support the use of federal funding or federal authority to conduct civil inspections. Does that help? Now, I think there was another question along the same vein.
Yeah, so the follow-up question was, so if there is a violation, should the tribe work it out with the state?
I'm not 100% sure what is meant by that, like what the relationship is, between the state and the tribe. If the tribe has a pesticide code where they're conducting an inspection and they find a violation, presumably you have in your code some sort of enforcement response mechanism as well. So I don't know. I'm sorry, Nina. I don't know what relationship there is with the state and what you mean by that. And then Nina has another question. Let's see. Since we don't have any, EPA doesn't have any approvals on pesticide use on cannabis, I suspect what you mean is we don't have any registered pesticides for use on
oh boy, sticky wicket, right?
It depends again on what you're asking. If you're looking at how EPA would look at it, it's all about what we've approved. Now, I do understand that there are states that are addressing pesticide use on cannabis where they've legalized the crop. Okay. Some we have no problem with because they're saying don't use pesticides, or they're saying you can use minimum risk pesticides. Some are recommending the use of registered pesticides, and we would not support that. We would not support that. They're saying, oh, we think this registered pesticide might be appropriate. I don't believe we would support that. So it would depend on what the state is actually saying in terms of what our position would be on their recommendation. Is there any?
Yeah, so does anyone else have any other questions for any of the panelists? Or Nina, do you have any follow-up questions with what Helene just said? So Nina replied, right, which is why I asked if the tribe should work that out with the state. So, yeah.
So I'm not sure if we're interpreting the questions correctly, but if we're saying a state has a legal marijuana law, say California, let's just say it's California. So marijuana is legal in California. There's all sorts of other issues about that. I mean, there's also still illegal marijuana going on in California. We just recently had a huge bust here in the Bay Area, in the East Bay, of an illegal grow going on in the middle of a city. So in a situation like that, we have no idea what pesticides are being used there. I don't think that we got pulled into it. I don't know, maybe Ben and Gabby know more about it than I do. But there's that situation. So if the question is, if the state has a legal program and they've so-called approved products for the legal crop in the state, then yes, that's probably a state issue, because as Helene has said several times, we don't have a federal registration program for marijuana. It's not a crop for us right now. So there are no federal registrations. So it's hard for us to sort of enforce something that doesn't exist. But again, if there's pesticide misuse, or as Ben mentioned, if there's sale and distribution of unregistered pesticides, we may or may not get involved. If you are talking to the state and not getting somewhere, I would still contact us, contact your project officer, or contact our enforcement folks, and we will try to help coordinate to get a response.
And just to follow up, we're sort of on call with a lot of the other federal agencies that deal with marijuana grows, and we'll get referrals of pesticide misuse or illegal sale and distribution. But sort of just to give a little context, a lot of the drug charges are 10-year mandatory minimums. So the person would have to go to jail for at least 10 years. Whereas the FIFRA illegal sale and distribution, how it breaks down to a private applicator, is basically an infraction, which means that they would get a max of 60 days in prison. So usually sort of how, prosecutors look at these kinds of cases is the environmental charge might add flavor and context to the criminal charge, but it's not going to be the substantive one. They would probably focus more on the drug charges. So usually we don't get involved. That's what I'm saying. When in a situation like you described, Julie, with the East Bay bust.
Okay, looks like we have a follow-up from Nina. I'll just go ahead and read it. My understanding is that the states are the ones approving pesticide use on legal cannabis grows. So if a tribe is allowing a cannabis grow and there's misuse of a pesticide allowed under the state, does the tribe only deal with the state on the enforcement in conjunction with tribal laws and not include EPA?
Well, again, here I am speaking for some other office in EPA, but I want my sister office to weigh in on that. And I'm assuming it's not a criminal matter. There's some tribal code you had. Okay. That under tribal code, there was some sort of inspection, you detected a violation, and you want to know if there's going to be enforcement. And so I would want someone from our Office of Civil Enforcement respond. If it's not a criminal matter, that would go to Gabrielle. Then I would want you to reach out to our Office of Civil Enforcement to find out if there could be a federal enforcement action based on anything you collected in your tribal inspection.
And Nina, if you need me to find the contact information for the Office of Civil Enforcement, I can do that. And if you'd like to follow up with that question, then we can certainly do that. Oh, and we got another question, but then that involves federal funds and FIFRA. Is that allowed?
No, I understood your question as meaning you did not use federal funds, you used your tribal funds, and that it was under tribal authority, not FIFRA. So agreement tribe and still have a tribal code and your own funding to do compliance monitoring work. But I think you got it that we would not, OC, Office of Compliance, would not cooperative agreement funding for these types of activities. but the tribe could use its own funding and its own authorities. And if you found violation, you could talk through Peter perhaps to the Office of Civil Enforcement to see what can be done.
Okay, just being mindful of the time. So we have about 8 minutes left. Does anyone else have any questions? Or Nina, do you have any other follow-up questions? If there are questions before or after the session ends, I'll make sure to include my contact information as follow-up. So if any of you guys have any other questions from the session, I'll make sure to post it below. But is there anything else? Okay. So if all the panelists, if you'd like, please include your contact information below. And I think we can go ahead and end this session. Like I said before, if you'd like to contact me or reach out to any of the panelists here, please feel free to do so. But I just want to say thank you to Helene, Benjamin, Gabrielle, and Julie Jordan for participating in this session. And also all the participants who decided to join. Thank you so much for joining. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to us. So thank you, everybody.